comes for greatness, we remember. Chase on got you caught in the storms of December. And brothers on the block packing nines like September. Change the situation, check it.
Nicole.
And I'm Star.
And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things black mental health. And we are here. We have some great guests today. And we're really excited. Star, what are we talking about?
All right, we got one for y'all. Okay, millennials in action. Young, gifted, and black.
This woman thinks she's on a soap
Young,
opera.
gifted, and black.
All right, y'all. So I'm going to let y'all know who we have in studio.
All right now.
We have Talik McMillan. He's a public policy and government relations professional, BA in political science from North Carolina A&T State University. I almost didn't even say the school. Talik began his service in politics and civil rights at just 13 years old when he began key work with the National Action Network. Now in D.C., Talik's government affair portfolio includes issues ranging from telecommunications, criminal justice, federal sentencing reform, ending racial profiling, equal employment protection, access to health care, immigration, women's rights, voting rights protection, among many other issues socially and economically. We have Kyra Stevenson Valley. She's a public policy and government relations professional. She has a BA in politics and an MA in international relations with a concentration in international law from New York University. Okay. Kyra's dedication to advocacy is well documented. From her previous role as a legislative fellow in the U.S. House of Representatives to her current position as policy advisor with the National Action Network, managing director for Kenneth Cyril Valley Foundation. And she was also the youngest commissioner on the D.C. Mayor's Advisory Board for Caribbean Community Affairs. Wow. Her commitment to identifying sustainable solutions to disparities in development across the black diaspora remains at the forefront of all she does. She's also an award-winning member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and she's also has been named 5 Under 25 by Women Everywhere Believe and recognized as 30 Under 30 Caribbean American leader. And last but not least, we have William Pugh. William David Pugh is a senior at Howard University, HU, hailing from Charleston, South Carolina, studying political science and philosophy. At Howard, he serves as the Director of Community and External Affairs within the Howard University Student Association, as well as serving as the Vice President of the COAS Honors College and Debate Team. Wow. Whether petitioning the local school board and high school, starting his own men's fashion business, or serving as the campaign manager for South Carolina State House candidate, now elected State Representative J.A. Moore. William has also valued working within his community to enact change and finding new and innovative ways to conquer challenging goals. He plans to pursue a career in politics or finance and ultimately leveraging whatever tools at his disposal to make a sustained impact by those most in need, bending towards the arc of justice. So we have some incredibly young...
They not lazy.
Yeah.
They not lazy.
We have some incredible young, gifted, and black millennials
here
in the studio today. And, so when Star says that we are talking about millennials in action, we are wanting to hear from you as millennials because, as Star mentioned, we often at times think like, oh, you don't have no problems, you're lazy, or you don't even understand what certain things are. And so we want to hear from you about the things that are bothering you, the things that you've gone through, and what's on the forefront of your mission, your issues, and how you deal with that. And then offering, of course, from our beloved Dr. Royster, who is here, offering some points of advice and words of wisdom as to how to get through those things. And we're just going to go ahead and start it off. So, I'd start down the line, Talik, Kyra, and William. What would you say, it looks like for you being a millennial in action, and how does that feel mentally and physically?
Yeah, so being a millennial in action, I feel there is a weight and it's a pressure on us because we didn't hold the mantle of generations to come. As you know, former Congressman Elijah Cummings, rest in peace to such a beautiful soul and such an influential person. When I was an intern on the Hill, he had said to us, the weight of our democracy depends on you, and we are depending on you. So as a generation, we feel that mantle to know that the future of our democracy depends on young people like myself, Kyra, and William, who are leading the charge in these spaces to make a difference. And you feel that weight because not many times you see young people who look like us, who are in these spaces, who are passionate about these things. And so it's different. And so how do we adjust? How do we fit in with our peers? And so that's the struggle that we face. But it's definitely we feel the mantle and the importance in our life to make a difference, not only for ourselves but for our families and our communities. So.
Ooh. Come on now, get up on that mic.
Yeah, I completely agree with Tyleek. I think there is an incredible weight with being like a young person now, seeing all of the things that are happening in politics, right? And wanting to make a difference and not necessarily knowing how. I think Tyleek, William, and I are in incredible positions where we have access to people who know what to do, but knowing how our friends and like other people in our communities might not have the same access, might not really know where to make a difference. I think that's like a huge stressor. So one of the things that have been really important to me is like reaching back. So as you mentioned, I'm the managing director of the Candor Valley Foundation. And what we do is train the next generation of like leaders and teach them how to advocate, teach them how to talk about these issues and how to have their representatives know the things that like actually matter to us. Because I think the most stressful part of being a millennial is seeing kind of like feeling the world is imploding around you and not feeling like you're being heard.
That's a real feeling. The world is wow. Okay, I feel you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I think as a millennial, one of the challenges I've seen with a lot of my peers is understanding the problems that are out there to begin with. I think it's easy to be a millennial, be relatively detached and kind of uninformed about what's going on. I have conversations with my grandparents often. I have a great grandfather who's turning 105. Wow. And just imagine the stories and the wisdom he's imparted on me. So I think part of it is working in a conscious way to understand the world, reality, our history is important for our generation. But I think it's also, we have to think about it as a marathon and not a race. Our ancestors, our grandparents, our parents did incredible things to kind of start that race. And we certainly have to, grab the baton that they're handing back to us. And then we can't stop there. We have to run even faster than they did. Because unfortunately, to be young and black, especially black in America, is to realize that you're in a race that you've already been set, hundreds and hundreds of years behind. So I think a lot of work has been done in the metaphorical marathon, but we have to grab the baton and make sure that we're prepared to run even faster.
Ooh.
That's good.
I'm like, I didn't feel, I'm just thinking back many, many years ago, y'all age, and like, even when we're at TSU, like, your generation is so weighty and like ready for the fight. I think all I wanted was a job and an SUV. I like literally was like, I want an SUV. That was my goal. I'm just impressed. I'm impressed.
What do you feel like prompted you to want to be in a position where you wanted to take action, and when you look around at your peers, because what the media tries to portray is that you all who are sitting here don't have the depth of intelligence that you've just displayed. So when you look around at the other peers that you have and that do you feel like for the most part that all of you as millennials care about the things that the media tries to say that you don't?
Yeah.
And then, on top of that, how do you, because when Kyra, you made a comment of, we have access to certain things where I feel like, I don't feel like we had access to impart change on things. And I don't know if that's because we didn't have social media during that time. I'm not sure. I don't know if that is, we were not ready for the fight. I mean, I'm not sure. But, what does your environment, does the peers around you, or I guess maybe is it just the peers you choose to hang out with, or do you see overall that your generation does care about the things that oftentimes, the media and other people try to say that you don't?
Yeah. Like I said before, I feel like we all have that mantle on our lives, and each person has their own story to tell, and each person has their own story that defines who they are. And your story helps your passion and your drive, what's behind it. For me personally, growing up in a single parent home, my mother being the great mother that she is, and my father being incarcerated, really encouraged me to want to fight for ending mass incarceration, to addressing the school to prison pipeline, so things like that, and making sure that my brother doesn't get in that system and following the footsteps of our father. But stuff like that, your story helps create that passion within you. Then also when you see the people around you and how they're being affected, even myself, I still find that myself has privilege in a sense, and you connect with your peers and who you see who are less fortunate in those situations, and that encourages you to see, well, how are they being disenfranchised? How are they being marginalized? And what can I do to ensure that even as young Black people, that we're not just looking out for ourselves, but I'm seeing how can I pull someone forward? As Michelle Obama said, we got to lean back, and so I feel like that's our mission, to lean back.
Yeah, I really appreciate that in our generation, I feel like people are really leaning into your individual story, like your individuality and being the best version of yourself. I think, to your point or your question about whether millennials are more or less educated, I'm not sure if they're more or less educated, but I do think with social media, it becomes so much easier to talk about these issues and gain an awareness about issues, so people are approaching them with more knowledge. But that doesn't always translate into action, especially from the social media standpoint. And I think that's something that our generation catches a lot of slack for, of like just being active on social media, but not moving out past that, which I don't think is always fair. I think a lot of times social media can be the spark that will get you to a protest or a rally or tell you which number to call to reach your member of Congress or your senator. So I think it's a very useful tool in sharing information. But when it comes to like the access and going beyond that, like making sure you know who works in your local government, making sure who works in the federal government, and like being able to call them about the issues that you care about. Because if our conversations are just happening in like echo chambers, they're not going beyond that. So I think that's like the really important part of the like knowledge barrier and where we might be falling down as a generation. But I do think people care a lot, and I think just because we have social media, it's so much easier to talk about issues that people wouldn't otherwise not know about.
Yeah, no, social media has completely changed the game in my mind. I mean, it's incredible the amount of information you can find by just picking up your phone and Googling it or going on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And I think, it can be a tool, but it can also be a weapon. And I think our generation is working to find better ways to make it more of a kind of useful tool, but I certainly think there are myriad of examples of it being weaponized kind of against millennials and people of color specifically. But kind of to the point of the importance of having that personal story. For me, it came in Charleston, South Carolina, where I grew up. I went to a predominantly white school, was one of 12 Black students in a school of about 700.
Wow.
And my football team, after beating predominantly Black teams, would take a watermelon and draw a racist character on it, make monkey noises, smash it.
Are you freaking serious?
I'm serious. I could not even make that up.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was kind of my jump into activism. I was kind of I went home and told my parents about that, and it was kind of off to the races from there.
Jeez.
Yeah. So
when you say that you're on this, you played football, correct?
I did not.
Okay, but the football team at your high school would do that, and you would observe that, and that's what you mean as far as like what prompted you to say, hey, I want to take action. How, for the kids who are currently in school with all white people, all white children, what propelled you or what gave you the strength to endure being one of 12, and I'm sure maybe dealing with comments or other things that you may have experienced in that school? What gave you that endurance, and how did you do that? How did you not say, yo, like, y'all need to take me out this fucking school
Get me up
and
outta
go
here.
put me on the other side, and with some of my people? Like, how do you go through that for 4 years?
I mean, first and foremost, the man upstairs. I would not have made it through high school without God. But I mean, I to be completely honest, it wasn't really I saw this or heard about this and felt like it was wrong and immediately thought I should do something. I mean, I found out about it. There was like a article in the local paper, and it took me really about a week to really get to the point that I felt like there was nothing I could do but speak out. And I think oftentimes when we hear of stories of people speaking out and people engage in activism, we assume that it was kind of always there. But for me, I was kind of just, I'm one of 12 black people in this school. Who am I to? I'm not trying to ruin the rest of my 3 years at this school.
That's honest. That's honest.
But then, to be completely honest, after a classmate of mine put an article in the school paper saying sometimes a watermelon's just a watermelon, went home, talked to my parents, and from there, at that point, for me, that was a tipping point. And from there, I wrote like an article in response to that, and from that point, received obviously a lot of criticism from my classmates. People saying I hate you the article was posted on Facebook. And that night, I'm a sophomore in high school, and people that I go to class with are posting, I hate you. If you feel this way, why are you at our school?
Wow.
Our school, not your school.
Right.
Why are you at our school?
Right,
okay.
right. So all of that's happening. But then on the other side of things, I have an incredible community in Charleston that's coming behind me and supporting me at the same time. I have, leaders and other young people and different organizations that are calling me. I don't know how they get my number, but I'm getting calls from people saying, hey, if you need anything, we're here for you. I'm sure you're going through hell. So I think as young people, we have to realize that a lot of times, especially today, I don't think our generation talks about the things that are going on behind closed doors. No one probably knew a lot that I was, going through.
But go deeper. Finish what happened as you went through that. I'm saying go deeper. Finish what happened as you went through that up until graduation. Because that is part of your story, and that is part of like what people misunderstand and misrepresent about young people and their experiences, and thinking that they haven't gone through anything, and thinking that they don't have the endurance, and thinking that they don't have the capability or the intelligence to persevere through certain things. So you're a sophomore, but then now I want to hear. Then you made it to being a senior. What happened during the junior? Did you have any white allies? Because we tend to believe that most white people are not allies. So for you, like, did that exist for you?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I obviously that period was challenging, but from that, definitely kind of viewed it as an opportunity to do more. There's a quote that I love that smooth waters never made a skilled sailor. I think it's the saying. And those were definitely my rough waters, and throughout life I aspire to be a skilled sailor. But I think so. From that, I did reach out and find white allies. I found black students that were interested in the cause. So to kind of rewind a little bit, the main thing to me that stuck out from this whole event was my school really lacks diversity. And it's something I knew from day one, but it was really apparent given that I have classmates that are, smashing a watermelon, making monkey noises. Like something is obviously wrong outside of the fact that there are very few people of color at this school. So from there, classmates of mine, as well as classmates from the adjacent school, got together with a Black Lives Matter organizer who actually was killed 2 years ago.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, in New Orleans, Mejia Dean. And we met with him, talked a lot about activism, ended up starting a student group called Students Advocating for Multicultural Education, SAME. And from there, we worked to lobby at the school board level, at our teacher level, principal level, and basically worked to try and enact different ways of increasing the racial diversity at the school. And initially, we didn't have a lot of success, but I'm happy to say that this year, some of the things and policies that we were working for 5 years ago are now being brought up at the school board level. So I think kind of having faith to the extent that I could in the process, that something good would come out of this, and realizing that despite feeling like I was going through all this in a vacuum, there were people on campus, there were people in the community, I had people at home, as well as faith to get me through all of that, was something that was instrumental in making it through those next 2 years.
Did you feel depressed? Did you feel anxiety?
I think.
Did you ever have to, did people ever try to, be violent towards you?
I don't know if I was depressed, but I think I certainly was at a low point in my life, to the extent that if I were to go back and look at it, knowing what I know now about depression, I actually might have been depressed. It was hard to go to school, hard to wake up. At that point, I thought it was just, I'm going through it. Yeah. Didn't really talk about it with anyone. At that point, wasn't going to therapy. At this point, I go to see a therapist regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Good days, bad days.
Exactly.
That's right.
Did you feel like did you ever question why did your parents have you in that environment?
I never thought specifically about why. I think from my parents' perspective, given where I lived and given kind of what their aspirations were for me, they wanted me to be in the best academic environment possible. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that came at expense of the diversity. And I think, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but I think, given the social environment of that school, it was kind of a blessing in disguise, and that my parents, put me in an environment that allowed me to succeed academically, but socially put such incredible pressure on me that it made me who I am today. And I don't know if I doubt they knew that going into it. They're probably like, oh, this is a good school, let's send them there. But in retrospect, I think I honestly would do it over again, because I don't think I would be here today doing anything I'm doing or being passionate or loud about the things I'm loud about if it weren't for those 3 years in high school. What
say you, Dr. Royce? I mean, all this that they taught, you guys, first of all, y'all are incredible. You're phenomenal. I'm like inspired. I'm like, let me get up and do something. But what say you as far as, all this weightiness at such a young age? How do you navigate it? What skills do they need to do we or they need to cultivate in order to navigate it successfully and healthy and intact? And when do you get too involved? When do you need to pull back so that you can be healthy and all that good stuff?
Well, I'm going to start with the end and work my way backwards. So we always talk about self-care, and we always talk about self-care for our leaders and for our advocates and our change agents, because that is critical. And the earlier you learn that and practice that, the longer you're going to be able to run this marathon, right? And it's so hard with the enthusiasm of youth to think that that's important. Ooh. Right? But self-care is critical, so you don't burn out, so you can keep going, so you can pay it forward and backwards. Because as you mentioned, as much as we look at you as the new generation, there's 3 generations already born who are coming up and looking to you for guidance and advice. And so that's really what I was reflecting on throughout most of their conversation, is there have always been young, gifted, and Black. Right? W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the talented 10th. And we're sitting here, and I think about when I grew up, and I'm like, this is like one of the most painful stories, just emotionally. It's not painful like physically, but when I was in high school, they had a track for the talented 10th. Every generation calls it something different, right? And they called it academically able. And I thought, well, what the hell is the other 90% of the kids?
Disabled.
Right? So you're telling these kids, and as a kid, I felt this way. Like, you're telling 90% of the school that they're not academically able.
Were you in the night? You were in the... She's like,
I'm a medical
doctor.
Come on now, right? But it was painful.
Yeah.
Because I had lots of friends in the 90%.
They was disabled.
And I'm like, they're no different than me. So why should I be afforded opportunities? Why should I be allowed to thrive and expected to thrive? Because also there's that expectation that you heard all of them talk about. Every generation has this group of young people that rise very early to the top. And it's heavy. It's heavy. And so I want to commend them, but I also want you to start by thinking about self-care very, very early, because we need you to run this race another 50, 60 years, right? And we hear longevity in your family. My great-grandfather lived to be 108. I have a picture on my wall, 5 generations of Roysters with my oldest daughter. And that's awesome. It's powerful. Every day you walk in, it's right at my front door. So I want my girls to see it, because there's a legacy that we as Black people carry. And every day, some of us carry it and want to strengthen it and want to move it forward and want to move the race forward. Others of us, that's another show.
That's another show.
So I hear that theme going through, and that just resonated with me. But I think the thing that's so different and unique to this millennial group is that in our generation, there were discrete and defined paths that we felt we had to follow. Whereas in this generation, they really have, and I don't know if it's just the infinite, diversity of their spirits, or if it's their, social media, but they don't feel confined by traditional paths.
Like
And I
cigarettes.
think that's why
That's true.
their activism has risen up so quickly and is making such a difference at such an early age in their generational pathway, if you will. They don't feel confined by the things that, you know, we were rule breakers, but not these kind of rules.
Nah, y'all,
Right?
y'all over
So
here
it's-
changing stuff.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal because we felt like we did things, and I have, talked to generational leaders from 2 generations ahead of me. There's one that I had a conversation with recently because 10 years ago I saw her and she made a comment that just shook my core for 10 years. And I finally had the opportunity to sit down and talk with her. And we talked about it. And she was like, child, I don't know why I said that. She said, I was always saying stuff. And, and we had a real, first I was just honored to be talking to her, but it was like an amazing conversation. And it let me know, and it reminded me that people are listening to what we say. And we're just talking off the cuff because we're excited and we're energetic. And even at that age, because now she's in her 70s, right? So when she was talking to me, she was in her 60s, and I was in my 40s. And it was like, and she was just human.
She was just being human.
She was just being human. And when we see them as leaders, we forget their humanity. So I love that this generation is more focused on their own humanity and the infinite possibilities of how they can make this change and how the world can be different. And they just don't feel confined in the way that I think previous generations have.
What's stressing y'all out? Yeah, I mean, I see my nieces and these young people. We were at TSU, and they were they were amazing students and wonderful. They're gonna change the world. I know it, but they were stressed out. Wouldn't you say that? The kids seemed like they had a lot on them. What is stressing these y'all out as the millennial leaders going forward? Now y'all want cat got y'all tongue. Now you don't want to talk.
I'm sure there's a lot. We could be here all night talking about things that stress us out. I think one thing that's unique in the age of kind of social media is I think a lot of people in kind of a paradoxical sense feel alone. I think a lot of young people feel so detached and isolated despite being so plugged into everything at every moment.
That's good.
Really?
And I think it's something that not a lot of young people speak about. And I think it's, again, one of those things that probably there'll be a study that comes out 10 years from now, 15 years from now that explains what I'm saying in a more, better articulated way. But I think a lot of people really feel alone. And I think it's kind of exacerbated by social media.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because even with myself being in a brutally honest sense, I find myself a very very likable person, and being at school, I'm very just talking. I was a very popular person on campus. I did a lot of stuff on campus, SGA, fraternity, even outside of that, working with Reverend Sharpton, and always in the light.
Do you have
around
Al
people.
Sharpton's cell phone number?
Yes.
I do.
Bars.
He likes to text us.
Right.
But being in those spaces, you find yourself, everybody, you're this, you're that.
Yeah.
You're very inspirational.
We saw him at at CBC, decked out tuxedo by the way, with Al Sharpton. I was like, what?
But yeah.
Did you see his hat?
Yeah, I did.
I had my hat.
Look, you brought it up.
But even with all of that, I still sometimes find myself in that alone space. You find out after that, when the lights go out and you cut your phone off, you still find yourself in your alone space, trying to figure out what is that extra encouragement that gives me to say, I want to wake up the next day and do this again. Because the pressure of it is so much. That you find yourself having to encourage yourself. There's times where I'm pouring out so much into other people that it's like, who's pouring into me? People text me and call me and say, Tyleek, can you pray for me, or could you give me an encouragement?
Wow.
But then there's still spaces where people have seen me at such a high that they forget to realize that I still have my own problems myself.
Is there a fear, like being so young, and you guys being
Oh, yeah.
so visibly successful?
Oh yeah, being vulnerable. And
Are you
being,
scared of failing, or when
of
that
course.
comes out
Of course,
publicly?
of
Okay,
course,
that's a
definitely,
fear.
definitely. Coming from a community where everyone sees you to be that next thing to come out of that community. Sometimes I have myself in a space and I feel like that I can't fail, and I feel like I can't say that I messed up because I have kids and I have people from my church watching me and expecting so much from me. And it becomes stressful. It becomes hard some days. But then you just got to find the extra push. I got to think back to my fraternity saying, "Don't quit." You know,
Right.
when the road your church is all uphill and the funds are low, debts are high. You want to cry, but you have to sigh. But you can't quit. So you have to find that inner strength within yourself to kind of encourage you, so you can make it to the next day.
That's a lot.
I think like my stresses aren't so much from being lonely, and I just feel like incredibly blessed to have like a community of people who will pour into me. Like I know the other day I was having a whole breakdown in the office just for no reason, and Tyleek prayed over me, and I really
So you the
appreciated
person texting me.
Yeah.
Would you pray for me? I got you.
But I got
Oh, she's like, hold up.
shit on you.
Yeah, because when you say you had a whole breakdown and you're like, oh, but for no reason, like, then what do you need prayer for? You know, so it's like, what, you know, like, let's speak to it. You felt like you were having a
talk it out.
breakdown, but like, what was that for? What was it that you were feeling?
Well, okay, I'll be like completely honest.
Ooh,
I
that's
have
what, you
like I've been
Yes,
diagnosed
yes.
with PMDD. So I like when I get my
What is
period,
that?
it's premenstrual
Menstrual, yeah.
dysphoric disorder. I think
Yep,
is what it's
that's
called.
correct, yeah.
And like basically
Yeah.
it's a like reaction to the estrogen and progesterone levels in your brain, and there's like something goes on with the serotonin, but basically it just like depletes the serotonin level in your brain. So I like take antidepressants for it every day, and I was really frustrated because I was crying at work and I didn't want to be crying at work, and it felt like it was completely related to this condition that I have no control over. And
So
that,
basically,
like,
the condition at times makes your emotions kind of go haywire.
yeah, and like I wasn't feeling like, if you asked how I was feeling, because like since having the getting the diagnosis and like knowing the language and kind of understanding more what was happening, I'm able to be like, okay, this is actually not how I'm feeling right now. Like I don't feel sad. I'm actually really happy, but I'm crying. And so I was frustrated because I was crying, and I was like, I can't control my body right now. So
which is a whole nother issue that
Yeah.
makes you feel upset, right?
Yeah.
But that's helpful, you know, to a lot of women who are probably feeling like I'm crying and I don't know why I'm crying, or I'm having these
I'm not
issues with my
upset.
period, or I'm having, you know, like this, you know, because that's a real part of you being a woman.
Yeah.
You know, and you know what that's like, and that Tyleek William can't relate to, but there's a woman who probably can, and who's listening, and that's even from my own experiences. I have PCOS. Like I understand what that feels like. So, you know, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. But yeah, it felt really stupid in the moment, even though it's not. It's like related to, but that's just how I was feeling,
That's
and
honest,
it might have been like a lie I was telling myself in the moment too, that I like, this is stupid, and it was just making me feel worse because I was going down that rabbit hole of like, I'm out of control, and this is like, anyway. But Tyleek prayed over me, and I really appreciated it. Everybody in the office gave me lots of hugs and gave me lots of love. But so like in those moments, I feel like I have a lot of friends I can reach out to and who will affirm me. And then also like having access to a therapist, having access to a psychiatrist who can, you know, talk me through these feelings and give me the language I need to know that I'm like this is part of something that happens to me. Like,
Where is it okay where it said where I think young people, even the black community, that we can say it's okay for me to go sit down and talk to a therapist? Because sometimes myself, I'll be like, I feel myself being stressed out, but like, do I really want to go sit on somebody's couch and tell them what I'm going through? Or
Yes.
you know what I'm saying? Or why don't I just go sit down and talk to God? You know, why do I got? And so I think sometimes
God,
that's a perception of like, why should I do that? But really having understanding that to say it's okay for you to do that. It's okay not to be okay. So.
Why is it, like, I guess with your generation, like, why is there seems to be this like even what you're saying about asking yourself the question, like, is it okay for me to go to a therapist? Should I just be able to go talk to God? Like, where is that coming from? Like, that sense of it's either or, and it's not both, because God makes therapists. So, like, where is that stigma of not wanting to do something that someone else may see as, I don't know, bad, wrong?
I think for me, I don't know. It's really just being able to suck up your pride and say, I have problems, like I have issues, just like everybody else's issues. And I think it's really the hard part to just say, being able to say in that moment, like you're wrong, or like you're like you failed. It's okay, and having to really understand that you failed and being okay with you failing. So I think that's.
And
What is that
I
about?
don't even fully see it as a failure. Like, I see it as like a tool in my toolbox. Like, I got the Bible, I have my devotional, I have my pastor, I have my therapist on speed dial, and I have my psychiatrist that I go see once a month. And like, all of these are the weapons that I need to make me the best version of myself. So I can do, fulfill God's plan for my life, and have the impact that I think I can have on the world if I have the tools I need to do so.
And I'm going to say, as in treating millennials over the years, different from other generations, and again, I think this may be because of not just social media, but all media. They have access so early to so much more information, and they didn't have to rely on previous generations to teach, if you will, them something, right? So a 14-year-old would come into my office and say, I looked up this video online and I think I have the symptoms of anxiety. And they would come in
With their like diagnosis,
like this.
I think this is
or
it.
they'd be like, I've been telling my parents for 2 years that I need to come see somebody, but my parents didn't think I should see someone. And so I think that their access to information, as we talked about earlier, has made them as a generation, it's a globalization, but it has made them as a generation much more willing to at least approach the subject of mental health.
Okay.
They may or may not seek help. They may have many other strategies, but having that conversation, it has been remarkable to me over my career to watch this generation just grow up and just be talking. Like, they'll come in, oh, I got bipolar, my friend got this, my friend got that, and I'm just sitting there like, we just talking about this now? Like, and it's so starkly different.
It's not hidden anymore. Okay.
I didn't say that.
But
I said that they're more willing to talk about it. At least I'm a psychiatrist, so you can't always judge what people will talk to me about as proof positive of what they may talk. But definitely their access to information has made them more open. And they don't feel as defined. I mean, that's where this whole about non-binary and all these different gender descriptions and sexuality descriptions, because they don't feel bound by the same things that historically we have felt bound by. And I think mental health is another
area
where their freedom and their access of information, when they look something up and they're like, no, that's not right, so I'm gonna call it this. And we just never felt the freedom to do that.
I'd walk around for like 10 years thinking, I'd be like, oh, I got bipolar, but I ain't gonna tell nobody.
Then another thing I wanted to bring up that all three of these fabulous young people have talked about is the weight of leadership. When you are a leader, and I know you two have experienced this because we've heard it in different iterations throughout different shows, but the weight of leadership is isolating. I think more for people of color than any other type of leader. Yeah. And so I hope that as you continue your leadership journey, you will seek out other leaders of color to help support you around this journey. It's been one of the greatest things that I have done, because as leaders, we're often isolated. Everybody's looking up to us, so we can't really be our whole authentic, most vulnerable self in most situations. But when you have a peer that's a leader in some other field or some other space, then you two can join and support each other. Number one, it's not threatening. And number two, you can share parts of things that you can't share with anybody else. But what they really talked about is the weight of leadership. And in some ways, people in families may experience this, you know, people in communities may experience this, but professionally, so I just want to give that a name, so that we can also
the weight of leadership.
So what? Just a question for you. See how now I'm taking over. Look, just a question for you. So what do you say to a young person who is in a position, who may be listening, that's at the forefront, who is leading and who is doing all these great things, who is like trying to find that answer for themselves, to seek that help?
He ain't taking over. He asking for himself. That was a question for me.
That's real. That's real.
I am that friend.
I am.
No, that's right. That's right.
But I think that, you know, use the tools you have. So on a previous show, we talked to a leader who connected with another leader on social media, right? They had a superficial social media relationship, and she took the chance, used her courage and took it offline and developed a real friendship with that person. And now she describes that person as her sister, right? And so that same thing I would say applies to your friend.
A friend of mine.
Right? You know other leaders that you follow on social media, that you see in other organizations who you really haven't connected with authentically, right? Take that risk. They probably need you just as much as you need them. I would say that the 4 women who are the most important in my life right now are women that I met in a professional leadership circle, and we never would have imagined 10 years ago that we would be who we are to each other in each other's lives right now today. And it's because we took that leap to make it authentic. And so you already have these people in your lives. You're already connected to them. You already probably eye them and admire them.
Both of them out there.
Yeah. and I bet you if you just took that leap, that you would then develop this lifelong friendship.
Yeah, I think social media, like you said, makes that so much easier. A lot of my work happens in the Caribbean. Of course, I'm like involved in the civil rights space here as well, but my real passion, like my heartbeat, is home in the Caribbean.
Where are you from?
I'm Trini and Jamaican, but I went to high school in Trinidad and like.
Oh, you Trini?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so those are like, that's where my foundation is based, and just like finding different leaders there and being like, hey, like, I want to know you, and I want you to know me, and we're going to be friends now. And if you're in the States, like, we're getting drinks, and that's all it is. When I come home, love a drink.
Dr. Jazz.
Love a party.
Love a brunch.
She said it. She said it. She was like, she did on the interview. Yes, she said it in the interview. She's like, I have a cocktail. I was like,
Nothing wrong with a cocktail.
Right.
You want to say something?
I was just gonna add, not to keep talking mess about social media, but I think it does. Again, like, it can be used as a tool or a weapon, and I think in a lot of ways, given how inorganic it is, and you know, I'm curious who John is, so I'm gonna find John on social media, add him on LinkedIn, schedule a coffee, and go get whatever I can get from John. I think a lot of young people approach interactions that way instead of like, oh, you know, Tyleek is cool. Let me just go get lunch with him and talk to him human to human. Not, hey, can you help me get a job? Hey, how can I, you know.
What's the nuance difference?
I think one is transactional and one is relational.
Yeah.
And I think, even speaking candidly, as someone who, you know, is in a lot of leadership positions, it's hard to not approach meeting people in a transactional way. It's hard not just ask someone on LinkedIn or find them on Facebook, reach out to them and say, hey, can we meet because I, you know, secretly want X, Y, Z.
What's the source of the difference between
Why
the two?
does it have to be a secret?
Right. I think even now, like, on being kind of on the other side of that and a couple years removed from college, like, I know there are young people who are out here looking for jobs. Like, when Hill interns reach out to me, a lot of times I'm not that much older than them, and they're usually new to DC, and I'm like, okay, like, yeah, I'll help. Like, I'm happy to help, but also let's be friends. Like,
Well, and what I was going to say is that a lot of my relational in the past maybe just 2 years as I've really elevated in my career have all started as transactional but have turned into relational. And I have intentionally been transactional as in, and I'll give you a prime example. I process contracts for the district, and I meet a lot of people who have their own business and who want to know me because they are like, oh, we want you to, potentially give us an award. Now, I can't do that. However, on the back end, as time goes on, it's possible that this transactional relationship, I may be able to help you do your business better. I may be able to give you advice on why your proposal wasn't good enough. But there are often times where there was an agency I used to work with. I had this woman is pretty well known in DC. She submitted a lot of bids and proposals and things like that. And over time, our transactional relationship became a real relationship because I asked her point blank period, would you be my mentor? Because there was something about this woman that I was very, very drawn to, and that I felt like that she could give me transactionally and leveraging in my career, both professionally and personally. Now, obviously, as we develop a relationship, there may be an instance where I'll have to recuse myself if I'm ever looking at her proposal or her bid. But, that's from a professional standpoint, and that's about ethics and integrity, and I can do that. So I think that, and this is all up for matter of opinion, is that we have to be okay, with receipt. So for me, I think it's okay to have a transactional relationship and being intentional about, I do want this from you, but this is what I can give to you. And then from there, maybe, as we're doing this transaction, I might look at you and go, well, you're not that damn bad of a person either. So now after this transaction, do you want to go get something to eat? And then that's where that relationship, I think, builds. So I would say, I believe it's okay or not to be afraid of, everyone wants something. Even if it's just a friendship. You want something, right? And I think that's something I learned from you. But be intentional about what you want.
Yeah.
You
Reciprocity is key to any good, or in my opinion, street psychologist over here now. I don't know what the real doctor gonna say.
It's the boarded part of the table.
The street psychologist says that all good relationships are reciprocal. And the biggest thing, especially for people that have access or some form of access and power, is that oftentimes you just want people to be upfront with you. Don't fucking pretend to like me, or oh my God, I'm so impressed. What do you want? And then I can say, I can give that, or nah, I don't want to give that, or I can't give that. And maybe you can go to this person and get it. So I respect a transactional setup because to me, I'm always just come to me with what you want.
And I think I agree absolutely what Sasha was saying, that most interactions are transactional from birth, right? We are designed as human beings, genetically coded to get what we need. And babies cry because it's a signal to the outside world that you need to come and attend to me, right? That's the reason that babies cry. So if they're getting all their needs met, babies never cry, right? So it's a natural, innate thing for us to need to connect to other people for transactions to get our needs met. What I'm suggesting is that we choose to make more relational connections authentically with people that can support us, right? Because it's very easy as a leader, and I think especially, it doesn't matter what age you are, but as a young person, it's seductive, right? People are calling me. People want my help. People need I'm doing, and I'm the hope of my neighborhood, right? It's seductive, but it's also draining. And so you have to acknowledge both sides of that coin, and you have to feed yourself. You all know you can't pour from an empty vessel, right? And so, yes, God can fill us up, but God put people down here for a reason, and they're to help fill us up too. So I think that it's really important to think about who those relational things are for you. And people may seek you as a relational thing. You may decide that's not one that you want to pour into, right? So you get to choose both ways. It has to be a mutually agreed upon, reciprocal situation.
Definitely. And upon reflecting after the three of you have set the record.
Let me get you straight real quick.
No, that was. I appreciate it. Iron sharpens iron.
That's right.
Ooh.
I don't know what I have though, but y'all are definitely iron.
Nah, you iron.
So I think the two are definitely probably intertwined to an extent. You can have transactional relationships that morph into relational, and relational that morph into transactional. I think on the point of transactional, one thing that I was actually speaking with a colleague about yesterday who was looking at internships is that white people will have transactional relationships all the time.
All the time.
And,
it's not even a big
someone's
deal.
dad will make a call and then they're in X school or they're in X position.
And it's an ask.
internship.
It's not a beat around the bush.
Right.
Let's go talk on the phone for 2 hours.
Hey, John,
Nah,
my
it's-
kids coming to your
No,
school.
they're like, exactly. So I think there is, to a degree, an importance for us as a people to realize the power of our own connections. And, not everything has to be a relational kind of. I think there are stronger relationships that are built that are exclusively transactional. But I think our networks are incredibly important, and I think Black people, Black leaders, Black activists have to realize that those things are important to tap into as well.
I think we have to be unafraid to be transactional because it's our fear of always trying to be relational that holds us back as a community.
I believe
because
it.
we're always faking the funk and
That's
and
my
then but then
homegirl.
yet
I don't know that
we
bitch.
don't even help we don't help each other.
I don't know her,
because
but I know her
we're,
job.
we're faking with each other, right?
right.
And so I think as we're closing out soon, one of the last things I wanted to ask you all, and especially when Dr. Worster touched on this, when we talked about the talented 10th or the what was that called for your generation?
Academically able.
The academically able. I wanted to ask you all because for me, I at one point in my life was not considered part of the 10th. I was in that 90%. I was going down the wrong path. And so my view on how to overcome is a little bit differently because I was able to get from out of the 90% to get back into the 10% and go down the path that I'm currently on. However, my question is that as young people, when you look around and you all are considered the talented 10th, when you look at the 90% around you who maybe not are considered that, how do you reach back to try to involve that 90%? Do you think that's possible? Do you see a difference or a shift in your generations of being able to include that 90%? Do you even feel that there's a separation of that? How would you address that? What are you doing with that?
Ooh, that's a great closing question. So I feel an incredible calling to do as much in any way I can to give back to the 90% to go along with the Du Bois talented 10th analogy. I think the challenging part is that when people, and not to speak generally, but there are a lot of people that quote unquote make it to the talented 10th, whatever we deem that being. And then they just forget about where they came from. They forget about the circumstances they went through. They forget about the trials and tribulations, the community that raised them, the family that raised them, the friends they had. I think all of that has to factor into the person you become when you get to a point of influence. And I think once you get to that point of influence, you have to look at uplifting your community through a lens of empowerment and not just helping people. I think, it's easy to get, to quote unquote make it and then say, how can I help these people when you used to be those people? And instead of trying to figure out how you can help them, you need to figure out what things can you do, what levers can you pull to empower them so that there's a sustained impact.
What's the difference between help and empower?
I mean, personally, given I'm really interested in politics and policy, I think, and these two are incredibly involved with policy nowadays. I think you can empower a community by, pulling a policy lever to increase funding or to ensure that there are more community seats at the table, or you can quote unquote help them and send a donation of water cases to Flint, Michigan. I think we need that, but I think we also need.
Okay,
I think we need ways. I think that's almost. Yeah, exactly. I think we have to make sure that people, know how to fish instead of just giving people fish. And I think that's more of a sustained. It's obviously a longer challenge, but I think it's something that's worth more of our energy. I think it's something that I always try and keep this in my head as life is chess, not checkers. And I think as young people, as we move forward in these spaces, we have to take the information of our elders. And civil rights leaders weren't playing one move at a time. These people were sitting down thinking about 3, 4, 5 steps ahead.
See all the angles. I got
Yeah,
you.
everything. And I think we have to do that. I think we have to find ways to use policy or activism or mass and numbers, find ways to empower people. And that's what I feel.
So I might deviate, but I don't really feel like there's a divide. Like, I don't think there's anything intrinsically in me that sets me apart from any of the people I grew up with when I first immigrated here. I think I was taught different things. Like, I came to that neighborhood I spoke 2 languages, and I had like a Canadian passport, and so I had different exposures. But I don't think there's something in me that like makes me better than anybody. Like, I think I just had different types of access, right? Which I mentioned in the beginning. So for me, it's just about opening those doors and like building those pipelines so people have the same type of access and can get and like see their dreams come true the way I've been able to. Like, I honestly came out of college thinking I was brilliant.
I love it.
I was like, wow, like, who is gonna have the pleasure of hiring me?
I love it. Talk that talk. Talk that talk.
They can pay me 6 figures.
Talk that greasy talk.
You're welcome. And then I got to DC, and I was like,
You were like, hold
I'm
on,
not
what?
making that.
like nowhere close to that, and like nobody's trying to hire me. Like, did you see my resume? Like, did
Exactly.
you want me to send you my thesis? They're like, no, we're not trying to read your thesis. Like, what are you talking about? And I realized it was just like people opening doors for me. It was like the first lady at my church. It was Ebony, who's now my boss, and like giving me the opportunities. And Ebony hired me like a couple months after me just volunteering with her, and I don't know that I would have had like a job this cool otherwise. So it's just about like other people who are opening these doors and reaching back. And so that's what it's nothing I did, because I poured everything into that thesis. I was depressed. I lost 30 pounds writing that thesis, and it didn't matter at the end of the day. It did not matter. Nobody cared. But what mattered was the people who showed up and opened doors for me. And so I want to be one of those people to the communities I came from, including the Caribbean.
And I think, just touching on what they both said, I think I'm not going to, just building those pipelines and being able to grant accessibility to those who don't have it, who don't have access. And what that looks like is bringing those people in those spaces where they're not as privy to as other people. So if I can help in any way I can, just making sure, just like she said, building those pipelines.
So what do you do if I'm a young person and I think, like I'm gonna use your example, I have a friend and that friend wants to change public policy around mental health and make access to care and educating the community and being community mental health certified, so that we can be aware of and identify when there's an issue with our peers in our community. Where do I start? Like, okay, I know there's a change. I know the 3 things I want to change. Where do I start? I've never been to Capitol Hill.
Well, first, I guess knowing who your representative is, and
Okay.
I guess being bold, and like you say, if you know your purpose and then you know what you have in mind, it's easy for you to carry it out. So knowing who your representative is, knowing what points you have, and being bold enough to say, hey, I have this idea.
Okay.
I have this thought, and you should hear it.
Okay. All right.
And I think that's where a lot of these organizations, and because people have thoughts and they have ideas, and they want these people who are in power to hear their ideas. So being bold and
go ahead.
Okay, I would say knowing exactly what your issue is, right? I think there are a lot of groups like NAN, of course, NAACP, who give space to like talking about these issues. You can get way farther with other people than you can by yourself.
Gotcha.
And then, talking about it, like having a community town hall, figuring out, I always advise people start local, because all politics is local. So who are your city council members? Who are your state reps? And then getting to Capitol Hill. And then figuring out who your U.S. senator is, who your district rep is, and calling their office. But sometimes they hang up and they don't really care. They throw those calls out sometimes. I promise you, I was there.
Ask for the schedule.
Yeah, no, don't even ask for the legislative assistant. Ask for the legislative director over that issue. See if you can schedule a meeting. Say I'm a constituent and I have a concern and I have a whole block behind me. So you actually need to listen to my concern, or else we're going to vote you out. And if they still don't listen, then you raise some money and you run and you take their seat.
Ooh,
Hey,
okay.
That's the energy right there.
I love it.
Just piggybacking and kind of following the succession of these two, I think if all else fails, run for office. And if you're too young to run for office, find somebody that embodies your ideals and get them in the office. Like the representative who I worked for was a mentor of mine during high school, and I was incredibly encouraged by him, worked under him on campaigns, and unfortunately, his sister was one of the 9 lives taken during Mother Emanuel. After that, I mean, he said instead of, lobbying at the State House and trying to get all these things changed and marching to get the Confederate flag down, I'm going to run for office. And shortly after that, he decided, I'm going to get to Columbia myself and change all these things. And as someone who looked up to him, I said, I'm on board. What can I do? And I think if you're a young person and you're not seeing that change happen, obviously, the cliche saying is be the change you want to see. Hop on a campaign, encourage someone to run yourself if you're old enough. And I think, through all those things, in addition to what Kyra and Tyleek said, young people really have a lot of power.
Thank you all for that. Dr. Verster, would you add any last words?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay with my theme. Community and connection and self-care. Regardless of whether you're a leader or not, you can't do any of these things if you are not filled, if you are not whole, if you're not taking care of yourself. You can't identify what the issue is that you want to go speak out about, that you want to get people to recruit with. And connection is so important. We're always stronger together, and more voices is much more powerful than one. And so with the power, and yes, there is a price, but with the power of social media, you can find like-minded people that might be willing to march with you for a little bit of the way of your journey. And so you have to be a little brave. You have to reach out. You can't just sit in the back of the crowd and, swing to the song. At some point you're going to have to beat your own drum, step out there, but do it in a purposeful and meaningful way and in a directed way.
I like that. Ooh, you talking that talk. I got 2 things.
All right.
First, I say every young Black person in America needs to read Stacey Abrams' book, Lead from the Outside. I guarantee it will revolutionize and change your entire life. Lead from the outside, find a way to make the change. And then second, as someone who has dealt with an anxiety disorder all their life, didn't get diagnosed until later in life, I would say, for me and with my therapist, one of our plans of action is always action is what breaks the inertia of anxiety for me. And so for me, taking action is critical to not being in a state of anxiety and, despair because, okay, I don't like it. Let me go change it. So take action. So.
I think in closing, I'm just, thank you all for being here. I'm super impressed at just your ability to really navigate through the current world that we're in and want to make a difference and be a positive change for those around you. And I thank you for that. I salute you. I'm wishing you all the best in your journeys. And I'm actually looking forward to, us even continuing to work with you all, even on our own journey. And so I would just say to any millennials listening, please take heed in as much positive way that you can, and know that you have some other millennials who are with you, who are standing with you, who want to encourage you, who want to be there for you and help you, and you too can help someone else who's after you. And this was great. Thank you so much. So
Closing quote.
Go ahead. You want to close
in
it.
the words of Shirley Chisholm.
He's gonna be a congressman one day. Come on,
in the words of Shirley Chisholm, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring your own folding chair.
Absolutely, but it's so, and it's our show, and so we out. I'll leave that in there.